So friends, whenever we talk about those Hollywood films that entered theaters with big dreams, but couldn't live up to their ambitions because of timing and circumstances, one name always stands out loud and clear, and that name is John Carter. This was not just a movie, it was Disney's giant project, one that carried massive expectations and hundreds of millions of dollars in investment. When the film was released back in 2012, the intention was to create a franchise that could rival Star Wars and Avatar, but the reality turned out very different. Today, we're going to dive deep into this film's entire journey, its making, its storyline, its box office run, why it flopped, and what really happened with the sequel plans that were once on the table. The roots of John Carter go way back. The movie is actually based on Edgar Rice Burroughs' 1912 science fiction novel, A Princess of Mars. This is the very same novel that indirectly inspired some of Hollywood's biggest franchises later on, including Star Wars and Avatar. When Disney decided to bring Burroughs' story to the big screen, the intention was clear. They wanted to turn it into their next giant space adventure franchise. The film was directed by Andrew Stanton, who was already a two-time Oscar winner with Pixar, thanks to Finding Nemo and Wall-E. Stanton's vision was massive. He didn't just want to make a single movie. He had planned out an entire trilogy that would gradually unfold John Carter's epic story across multiple films. John Carter was released in the United States on March 9, 2012. Disney spent over $250 million just on production, and on top of that, nearly $100 million more on marketing. Altogether, the cost ballooned to around $350 million, making it one of the most expensive films ever produced at the time. As for the cast, Taylor Kitsch played the lead role of John Carter. At that time, Kitsch was seen as a rising star in Hollywood. Lynn Collins took on the role of Deja Thoris. Mark Strong played Matai Shang, and Willem Dafoe, through motion capture, portrayed one of the alien characters. The story itself begins with John Carter, a veteran of the American Civil War, whose life is in turmoil. One day, he suddenly finds himself transported to Mars, or as it's called in the film, Barsoom. On Mars, because of the difference in gravity, his strength and jumping ability are many times greater than that of the native beings. He encounters an alien race called the Tharks, and slowly gets pulled into their wars, politics, and conflicts. The core narrative is about how an outsider like John Carter ends up playing a crucial role in Mars's fate and eventually becomes a hero to its people. The visual effects were massive for their time. The world of Mars was depicted in breathtaking fashion, but critics argued that none of it felt truly groundbreaking. By 2012, audiences had already seen Avatar, which had redefined cinematic visuals. So when John Carter arrived, its uniqueness didn't shine as brightly as Disney had hoped. Now let's talk about its box office and why it failed. Worldwide, John Carter grossed around $284 million. But with production and marketing combined, the costs had crossed $350 million. That meant Disney faced one of the heaviest financial losses in Hollywood history. In fact, Disney publicly declared it as a $200 million loss, and the film quickly became infamous as one of the biggest box office disasters ever. But here's where things get really interesting. Andrew Stanton never saw John Carter as a standalone movie. He had always intended it to be the opening chapter of a trilogy. The sequels were going to be titled Gods of Mars and Warlord of Mars. In fact, work on the scripts and storylines had already begun before the first film even released. Gods of Mars was planned to be even more thrilling. John Carter would return to Barsoom, encounter new alien races, face new challenges, and uncover a huge conspiracy that would change the entire fate of the planet. But all of this remained unfinished because the failure of the first film forced Disney to cancel the sequels immediately. For Taylor Kitsch, this was also a major setback. Around that time, he had signed on to several big projects, including Battleship. But when those films also flopped, his rising Hollywood career suddenly hit a roadblock. So why did John Carter fail despite such massive effort and budget? There are several reasons. The first was its marketing. Disney simply didn't execute it well. Even the title became a problem. Originally, the movie was called John Carter of Mars. But later, the Mars part was dropped to supposedly attract a female audience. Instead, this move actually weakened the film's identity and confused audiences. Second, the story didn't feel engaging enough. Critics complained about pacing issues, underdeveloped characters, and an overly long runtime. Third, timing played a huge role. By the time John Carter released, audiences had already been blown away by Avatar. And since Burroughs' original story had inspired Avatar in the first place, the movie ironically felt like it was copying something that had originally copied it. For Disney, the failure was so costly that they changed their entire strategy. Instead of risking money on new and untested franchises, they doubled down on already successful ones, like Marvel and Star Wars. Yet, despite all of this, John Carter still has its loyal fan base. The movie may have been a flop commercially, but fans loved its world building and unique style. Even today, there are people who actively campaign online asking Disney to revive the franchise with a sequel. Director Andrew Stanton himself has admitted multiple times that he still dreams of completing his trilogy, but Disney has never given him back the rights. In 2014, the rights reverted to the Edgar Rice Burroughs estate, and since then, fans have been hoping that maybe, someday, another studio, or maybe even Disney Plus, will reboot the franchise. So friends, the story of John Carter doesn't really end with the first film. The real twist, the real magic, was always meant to be in the sequel, John Carter 2, Gods of Mars. The story was already written, the vision was in place, and had it been made, audiences might have experienced the grand universe that Andrew Stanton had originally imagined. So friends, up until now you've seen how when John Carter released in 2012, it turned out to be a huge disappointment for Disney. Andrew Stanton's dream was left incomplete, and the journey of the planned trilogy, Gods of Mars and Warlord of Mars, stopped right there. But the real magic was always meant to be in those sequels. Today, let's step into that world in detail. The world that the audience never got to see, but one that could have changed the history of science fiction cinema if it had ever been made. Andrew Stanton had carefully designed the story of Gods of Mars. His vision was that the first film would only serve as an introduction, while the real depth, thrill, and emotion would come alive in the sequel. The story of Gods of Mars was set to begin with John Carter returning to Mars. At the end of the first film, John Carter was celebrated as a hero in the battle between Zodonga and Helium, but suddenly he was sent back to Earth. The opening of the sequel would pick up from there. Carter finds a way to return to Barsoom, only to discover that conditions have become far worse than when he left. In Gods of Mars, John Carter would face the alien race known as the Therns, who had been briefly introduced in the first film. The Therns presented themselves as gods, manipulating and deceiving the people of Mars for centuries. Their true purpose was control, keeping the planet's civilizations enslaved under their secret rule. Stanton had planned to expand on this idea in a much bigger way, revealing that the Therns were the true villains, pulling the strings from behind the scenes and threatening the very future of Barsoom. But the sequel wouldn't have been about physical battles alone. Carter would also be forced to face deep emotional challenges. His relationship with Dejah Thoris would grow stronger. But at the same time, another princess named Thuvia would enter the story, adding new layers of political intrigue to Mars' already complex dynamics. The film would have unfolded like a conspiracy thriller, filled with constant twists, surprises, and new characters at every turn. Andrew Stanton's plan was to make Gods of Mars darker and more mature in tone compared to the first film. While John Carter was more of an introduction, the sequel was meant to shock, surprise, and deeply engage audiences. We would have seen darker regions of Mars, the underworld-like landscapes, where Carter would encounter new creatures and face challenges unlike anything from the first film. The climax was designed as a massive showdown between John Carter and the Therns, a battle far more epic and visually breathtaking than anything in the first movie. Stanton wanted audiences to feel the weight of the stakes. This time, it wasn't about the survival of just one kingdom or one city, but the fate of the entire planet. The third installment, Warlord of Mars, would then complete the trilogy. Here, John Carter was meant to rise as the ultimate savior of Mars, completing his hero's arc and cementing his place as one of science fiction's greatest champions. But sadly, none of this ever came to life. Just imagine, friends, how incredible this cinematic universe could have been. Picture a grand trilogy where each film was bigger, darker, and more epic than the last. And since Edgar Rice Burroughs' original novels already existed, Stanton had a solid roadmap to follow. All that was needed was a positive response to the first film, but its failure shattered the dream before it could even begin. Now, let's talk about the fans. Despite the flop, John Carter still has a loyal fan base to this day. Over the years, social media campaigns like #JohnCarter2 and #Gods of Mars have gained traction. Fans have even filed petitions asking Disney to bring the sequels to life. When the rights reverted back to the Edgar Rice Burroughs estate in 2014, the hopes of fans grew stronger, with many believing that perhaps another studio or even Disney Plus might revive the story in a new form. Disney, meanwhile, had shifted its focus entirely to Star Wars and Marvel, franchises that guaranteed billion-dollar success. As a result, John Carter was pushed aside. Yet, interestingly, many insiders have hinted that Disney Plus could someday develop a new John Carter project, maybe not as a theatrical film, but as a high-budget streaming series. And in today's era, where streaming platforms explore bold and diverse stories, such a possibility is far from impossible. If we speak hypothetically, if John Carter 2, Gods of Mars had been made, its budget would likely have been in the range of $200 to $250 million. Disney would have released it globally, positioning it as a direct competitor to Star Wars and Avatar. With the right marketing, and if the story resonated with audiences, the box office could easily have reached 600 to 800 million worldwide, maybe even more. But since the first film had already failed, the studio was unwilling to take the risk, and the project was abandoned. So the big question remains, what about the future? Can John Carter ever return? The answer is yes, but probably not in the exact form Andrew Stanton had once imagined. If Disney chooses, they could reboot the story entirely with a fresh cast and updated script. Burroughs' original novels are still highly relevant and packed with content that could appeal to modern audiences. Fans often point out that if James Cameron could create something like Avatar and turn it into one of the biggest cinematic universes ever, then surely the John Carter saga also deserves another chance, with the right director and the right studio support. At the end of the day, friends, the journey of John Carter teaches us a powerful lesson that no matter how big the budget or how grand the vision, success depends on timing, execution, and audience connection. Without those, even the most ambitious dreams can collapse. But it also reminds us that a good story never truly dies. Whether today, tomorrow, or decades later, stories like John Carter's still hold the power to capture imaginations. And that's why fans continue to believe that one day, in some form or another, this franchise will rise again